Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Burlington Green webinar. Thank you so much, everyone who is joining us right now in the present on April 5th at 7 p.m. And to everybody who might be watching this on our YouTube page at a later date, thank you so much for joining us for another amazing webinar with Bob Bell. So the title of this webinar is Out of the Lyme Light, Wellness Through Birding. And you'll see in the picture to the left, Bob has his book there that is being highlighted, which is Out of the Lyme Light and Into the Sunlight. And Bob will be speaking a little bit more about his journey and his book this evening, and offering a little bit of that sunlight or spotlight to his own work and to his own story. We always like to start all of our Burlington Green events with a land acknowledgement, so I'm going to do that now. As stewards of the earth, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, and all of the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who have been living on the land since time immemorial, and we recognize their leadership in protecting and caring for Mother Earth. In Burlington, our work with the community takes place within the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, represented by Treaty 14 and 19, and on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and Métis people. We honor these rightful caretakers of this sacred land surrounding the Great Lakes, and we are grateful for their teachings. We are each encouraged to continually learn from and about the Indigenous communities where we live and how we can meaningfully honor the calls to action for truth and reconciliation. And one thing I like to show whenever we're doing land acknowledgements, at least in the youth network here that we host at Burlington Green, is this map. And one of the reasons I love to share this map is because this is one of the ways I honor my process of learning in the calls for action for truth and reconciliation. And part of that is just questioning the knowledge that I feel like I do carry about Indigenous communities. And I share this because I didn't see a map like this until I was 32 or 33 years old. And it made me question my understandings of my knowledge and my education about Indigenous history here in Canada, because prior to seeing a map like this, I believe I had the false understanding that North America was not very densely populated. And as you can see from this map, the entirety of North America, or Turtle Island, was inhabited by Indigenous peoples. And I also just love to point out that another way this map is not traditional is if you look at the borders, there really aren't any solid borders or boundaries in this map, and there's a lot of overlapping areas, which again just shows the relationship to the land in terms of stewardship and not in ownership. And if you check out that map down there, native-land.ca, it's an Indigenous created resource, and you can see that wherever you're tuning in from, you can zoom into that area of the map, and it's an evolving map with more wisdom being added to it all the time. But you can always see, no matter where you are in the world, the Indigenous history from the place that you are currently residing or playing or living or working. Some Zoom features for today, just some basic housekeeping for those of you who might be new to a Zoom webinar, is you'll see down at the bottom of the screen your regular sort of strip of tools or icons that you'll see. There's a Q&A portion where you can submit questions at any time throughout the event, and we will receive all of those. And we do have specific time at the end that we've set aside for questions and answers. But like you've already been doing in the chat is open. So thanks so much for everyone who has introduced themselves and shared where they're joining us from today. And feel free to interact, and you can also place your questions in the chat because it is being monitored by one of our amazing Burlington Green team members. And we would love to interact with you as much as possible this evening. So I am very, very pleased to have the honor of introducing Bob. and have had the honor more recently to be able to check out some of the previous recordings that are on our YouTube page, which we are lucky that will live on forever, as long as the internet exists, which seems like it'll be forever. But there are 3 different webinars that are already loaded on our webpage, and you'll see I have a link to show you what those are in the next page. But it is my honor to share just a little bit of a brief introduction about Bob, and more specifically what the evening is going to be about tonight. So this event that we are hosting this evening is a little bit more about Bob's personal journey than some of the other webinars that we've hosted that have been focused on things like owls or warblers. And it's highlighting Bob's personal journey into the world of birding, highlighting his recent book, Out of the Lyme Light and Into the Sunlight, Birding as Therapy for the Chronically Ill. So as a result of contracting Lyme disease, Bob Bell had to retire prematurely in 2015. After relocating to Ancaster, he subsequently discovered that birding was a fantastic coping mechanism for dealing with his chronic pain. Bob's talk will describe his onset of a bizarre set of symptoms, followed by his frustrating experience dealing with the conventional medical system, and eventually diagnosis and treatment. He will then discuss his subsequent discoveries of the wonderful therapeutic benefits of birding and birds, explain why it's so beneficial to one's health, and give resources and tips on how to get into birding as a wonderful hobby. The Out of the Lyme Light book, I will likely mention again at the end, but just to know where you can get it, is it's available at Wild Birds Unlimited here in Burlington, as well as a Different Drummer Books, also in Burlington. And then in Hamilton, it's available at King Street West Books, and it's also available directly from the publisher. So all of that information is available right on our website, and we'll make sure to include that again when we send out our follow-up from our evening today. And like I mentioned, we've had some previous events with Bob. So that was the wonderful world of warblers. We had an introduction to birding in Burlington and Hamilton, and we also had the mystique of owls. All of them have been very, very popular, and we're just very lucky, I would say, and very grateful anytime Bob chooses to share some time with us and with all of you, because as you'll be able to see from the previous webinars, they're always a hit. People really, really enjoy them. And I would say specifically right now, with so many competing pressures on our wellness in many different forms, that anything that we can learn that can help us to cope and to thrive in today's world, especially when we can use nature as part of those tools, is wonderful, and I would say essential. Like I mentioned, here are the different places that you're able to get Bob's books, and fear not that all of this information will be available in our follow-up email, which you'll receive early next week. And I skipped ahead a little bit there, but we are so happy to welcome Bob again tonight, and I hope you're all ready for an excellent evening. Thank you again to all of you who have decided to join us this evening, and I will now hand over the screen to the very wonderful Bob Bell. If we can give him a warm welcome in the chat, that would be really, really great.
Thank you so much, Kale. If everybody can bear with me for a minute, I'll share my screen. Oh, Kale says I can't yet. Okay, here we go. So just bear with me and get the slideshow running. Takes a few seconds.
We got a big congratulations on your book in the chat.
So here we are. So thank you, Kale. That was a very wonderful, kind introduction. You're too kind. So this is the cover of my book, and I had the concept of tying together my new passion of birding with my Lyme disease by having an image of a bird stomping on a giant tick. And of course, this concept came to me at 3 o'clock in the morning when I do my best thinking. And my daughter Candace painted this cover, and I'm very, very proud of her for that, because I think she did a fantastic job. So just a few acknowledgements right off the bat to, Kale and the wonderful Burlington Green. Been so supportive of me, and I really, really appreciate it, giving me this opportunity to share my story. You're going to see a lot of bird photos that I've taken. I'm not going to necessarily refer to them. I might on a couple of them, but they're just there for you to enjoy while I'm talking away. I'm very, very lucky to have had three quite prominent Ontario birders read an advanced copy of my book and write an inside the cover blurb. Paul Riss, many of you might know, lives here in Hamilton. Paul sits on the board of the American Birding Association, and he was the subject of a very good CBC documentary called Rare Bird Alert. Chris Early is a naturalist at the University of Guelph Arboretum, and he's the author of many, many very well-received field guides. Julius Rankin resides in Toronto, and I can't recommend enough that she's written this lovely book called Field Notes from an Unintentional Birder. It's really entertaining. And now in terms of forwards, they're very unusual because typically a book would have one forward, but because there's sort of two halves to my story, the Lyme side and the bird side, I was lucky to get an expert from each side. So Frank Izaguirre lives in Pittsburgh, and he is the editor of American Birding Association's Birding Magazine. And Dr. Ken Leigner is a New York State-based Lyme expert doctor. So thanks to everybody there. Now, just a disclaimer, when I used to be working and I'd be giving corporate presentations to fund managers and investors, my lawyers would always insist that I have what they called a forward-looking statement, which basically meant you can't trust or believe anything I'm saying is going to come true. And nothing's really changed. I'm a geologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm an amateur birder, so I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm just relaying my experience, my knowledge. And you have to understand, a lot of my knowledge was gained when I was in the throes of Lyme brain fog. So take it with a grain of salt. Quick word about myself. I grew up in Northern Ontario in the Sioux. My dad was a high school science teacher and vice principal. And being a teacher, of course, the summers were off and they were spent at camp, which was east of the Sioux. And Dad really instilled in me a love of science of all kinds, nature and the outdoors. I had a telescope. I collected butterflies and moths and rocks and you name it. So it's not surprising I ended up with a degree in geology and working outdoors. I spent 35 years in the mineral exploration industry, working all over the world. Here's some of my travels. And when I did have to retire because of Lyme, I was serving as the CEO of a Toronto Stock Exchange listed junior mining company. I always at the stress, I joke, I'm an accidental author. I wrote this story initially for myself because it was cathartic just to get it off my chest for all my frustrations. And then someone said, well, you should find a publisher. And I did a bit of a Google search, found some Canadian publishers, and then Hancock House seemed to fit the bill of science, outdoors, nature, wellness, healing, biography, autobiography. And, here I am, lucky. And I found this cartoon and it just cracked me up. This woman with a vacant stare out the window is supposed to be working. And, the birds are saying, judging by the amount of time that she spends staring out the window at us, she's either a very committed ornithologist or a very unfocused writer. I think I'm both. So a lot of people to start off will say, well, Bob, where in the world did you contract Lyme? And the short answer is I have no idea. I'm not aware of ever having had a tick bite, and I'll explain that in the next slide. I have been exposed to pathogens from all over the world, as you can see from that map. I've worked in a lot of dodgy places like the Brazilian Amazon, the jungles of Indonesia and Southern Africa. All I do know is when my symptoms began. So, a word about ticks, and this is going to explain why so few of us are even aware of a tick bite. Supposedly, less than 50%, and I recently saw an article that said only 30% of people with Lyme are aware of having had a tick bite. And then of those, only about half get what the government calls the diagnostic bullseye rash. And I think part of the problem is that ticks can be infectious even at the nymph stage when they're the size of a pinhead. So Gregor Beck works for Birds Canada, lives down along the shores of Lake Erie, which is a real hotspot for ticks. And he gave me permission to use these pictures. So here is an embedded tick, a black-legged tick, deer tick, and even blowing up, you can see it's quite tiny. So never mind if it's on your back or somewhere you can't see, that could be on your hand and you'd have a hard time spotting that, especially if you're like me and you have a lot of moles or freckles, or, what if your skin tone was darker than my pasty white? It would be very difficult. So it's not surprising that so few people are aware of a tick bite. And yet I hope it's better now, but the government message seemed to be to me back in my time, that if and only if you have an embedded tick and if you have that bullseye rash, then you should be seeking treatment. And that's misleading. You need to get moving on it. And I should caution, I'm not trying to fearmonger. I just want people to be aware of what could happen. So, the ticks are very generous. They don't just pass on the Lyme bacteria, which is called the Borrelia. Most Lyme patients, including me, get what are called co-infections. So the most common ones are Babesia, a parasite, and Bartonella, which is another bacteria. And I've got or had both of those. And, it seems like every Lyme patient presents with a slightly unique set of symptoms. And it seems like we all recover to varying degrees at varying speeds. And my non-medical geological guess is perhaps it's due to the varying ratio of the toxic load we get, depending on which co-infections we have and the ratios of them. Just my theory. So I mentioned I know when it began. In September 2013, I was just back from 2 back-to-back trips, one all through Southern Africa and one out to Saskatchewan, where I know I walked out into some tall grass at a barbecue. And shortly after those trips, I came down with really massive cold chills. The whole body was shaking and a high fever. And I remember so clearly, because I remember the doctor doing this, infectious disease doctor. I had caught dengue fever from the Brazilian Amazon, and he was shaking his finger at me, don't get it again, because the second time around, it can be hemorrhagic and fatal. And it started exactly the same with the cold chills and the fever. But dengue fever is also called the breakbone fever because you feel like every bone in your body is broken, but it just has to run its course about 10 days. There's nothing you can do about it but suffer. But these chills went away after a couple of days, 3 days. So I just totally forgot about them. And then about a month later, really weird things began. And so in hindsight, that fever was either the initial onset of the Lyme infection that I picked up on one of those 2 trips, or it was a random infection which triggered latent Lyme, because I was later to learn from my Lyme doctor that she believed that you could carry Lyme with no symptoms for up to 10 years, and then it could be triggered by some sort of infection. So the symptoms, the first thing that happened to me was every morning when I woke up, the side I'd been sleeping on stayed, asleep, sort of pins and needles, a sleep sensation. You kind of shake it out and then get moving. And then that was every morning. And then a few days after that started, I would have these absolutely horrendous, what I call migratory muscle pain. It would be in my bicep, and then a few hours later it'd be in the triceps, and a few hours later it'd be up in my shoulder. The muscle pain was moving around. Lyme affects every major body system. The big one is neurological. So I still have or had all of these symptoms: peripheral neuropathy, the pins and needles, burning, tingling sensations. I still have that in my hands. The top of my feet still burn. I developed a really strong tremor. I still have a loss of balance. If you see me out birding and I suddenly take a step, it's because I'm kind of losing my balance. I had a lot of cognitive issues, very frustrating. They kindly call it brain fog. I could call it worse. I can remember trying to buy Globe and Mail newspaper for, I think it's like $1.75 at the time. And I could not count that change. I got so frustrated and embarrassed. Lyme also triggers like this anxiety, and I still have that. I can't handle big noisy crowds, and I'll talk later about some aspects of birding could cause anxiety if I went with them, but I don't. My mood swings were gyrating, and if anybody knew me, that's not me. Like, I could find myself raging at a store clerk over some trivial little matter. It just wasn't me. It was like I was possessed. It affects your joints. My Lyme doctor said, I hate to tell you, but the bacteria are eating your wrist joints. So I have what's called crepitus, which is the snap, crackle, pop when your joints pop, and I can do it on demand. I can play a tune on my wrists. And in my book, I joked that crepitus sounds like decrepit, and I felt like I was becoming decrepit. I developed and have very strong arthritis in my neck. It can be very difficult to, for example, check my blind spot driving. It's hard to turn my head. These are gone, thankfully, but I was having muscle twitches. I could look down on my arm and see like a little muscle fiber firing visibly up and down, go on for 20, 30 seconds, really bizarre. And my heart would go out of rhythm, and it felt like, it was an eternity. It was probably 5 to 10 seconds, but these heart palpitations would go out of rhythm. I get very easily winded just climbing a set of stairs. My legs would go to mush and I'd be panting. And to this day, and I think this is the babesia, the parasite, apparently it affects your lungs, and you can hear I'm going to get croakier and croakier as I talk. And that's the result of that. It was like my internal thermostat was broken. I was like running hot, very just hot and sticky. I developed a real roaring tinnitus, and in fact, I'm booked to go see an ENT expert, because some days I feel like I'm losing my mind. It feels like it's about 80 decibels, and being very hard of hearing now because I can't hear over that tinnitus is a real challenge to be a birder. Major symptom when I first came down with the Lyme was the fatigue. When I was going to work every day, and it would hit me like I ran into a wall. I would need a nap, like it just came over me, and I couldn't get back to my condo fast enough to sleep for 2 or 3 hours. And I was so weak, I had to walk with a cane, and which also helped me with my balance. So Lyme is called the great imitator, and this is part of the problem and why it's so difficult to diagnose, because a lot of those symptoms, and again, I don't want to fearmonger, having given you all these symptoms doesn't mean that you have Lyme. There could be many, many things, but at least I hope I'm planting that thought in your head, that because it never crossed my mind, and by the time I got to that, it was probably too late. But Lyme imitates the symptoms of Parkinson's in particular, a few of ALS, and very interesting, multiple sclerosis. Now, just an anecdote: Canada officially has the highest rate of MS in the world. And the party line is it's because that we live so far north, we don't get enough vitamin D from the sun, and then however that cascades down to causing MS, I'm not sure. But I would argue there's 500 or 600 million Europeans that live further north than we do. And we just forget they're that far north because the Gulf Stream keeps Europe much warmer than it should be for its latitude. So I kind of wonder, is Canada's very high MS rate actually, that excess rate might be misdiagnosed Lyme? Again, a geologist's medical theory. So here comes the frustrating part of dealing with the conventional medical system. So, I went to my doctor about this weird sensation that everything was asleep when I woke up, all the pins and needles. And he just totally dismissive. He said, well, it's just the way you're sleeping. And at that point I was 58. I thought, I've got 58 years under my belt of sleeping, and no, this is new. And then he then finally conceded, and I was sent to a neurologist, and they did these quite horrific nerve conduction tests, which are a little bit painful. And they did a brain MRI, and I am very happy to report that they did find a brain, but he literally washed his hands like this with a smirk on his face, and he said, I'm sorry, you don't have a neurological disease. But there was no interest on his part to try to figure out what the heck was going on. It was like, I didn't tick the boxes, pardon the pun, so I'm done with you. So I then got a referral to an infectious disease doctor. Now, I still wasn't thinking Lyme, but I got a referral in, and he was rated one of the top infectious disease doctors in Canada at the time. And it came back, I will evaluate Bob for everything but Lyme. You know, just said, okay, pass. They probably already spent $20,000 of the Ontario medical system testing me for everything. Why would I go to him and just repeat all that? So then when I, I'll come to it in a minute, but when I finally did get my diagnosis at a lab in the States, I brought that back to my doctor in Toronto, and he just sneered. He said, "Of course they found you positive. They want your business." And, I mentioned the unstable emotions. Well, I just about ripped them, and I said, look, at this lab is purely a diagnostic lab. They have no ulterior motive or financial incentive to find you negative or positive. They don't care. They're just trying to help you get a diagnosis. So, when I explained that to him, well, then he harumphed said, well, where in the world could you have gotten Lyme? As if it doesn't exist here in Canada or Ontario. And he kind of came around when I said, well, I've worked all over the world. That kind of made him happier. So then I thought, okay, here's a good brainstorm. I'm going to find a younger doctor, one that's just graduated, that maybe is more Lyme literate. So I got myself in to see this doctor. And she sat there, and I explained that I was going to the States and getting some treatment. And she sat there and looked at me, and she said, all I can say is, if you're spending all that money in the States, buyer beware. And I just looked her in the eye and I said, if you could spend 2 minutes in my body, you wouldn't be so dismissive and cavalier. And at least she had the decency to blush. But, so she was done with me. So as my daughter Candace said, Dad, you would have been better off going to a vet. And it's so true. I mean, we inoculate dogs. There was a vaccine for Lyme. So my takeaway message to everybody is that you have to be your own medical advocate. And the problem is, the challenge is that you're doing so when you're least able to do so. You're super tired and fatigued. You hurt all over. You're scared. You wonder, what is happening to me? Your emotions are running amok. And yet you can't take no for an answer, and you just have to keep pushing on. So I got lucky because I have a dear friend who knew a friend with Lyme. And when I started describing my symptoms to her, she literally cut me off and interrupted me and said, have you considered Lyme? Because she connected the dots and said, your symptoms sound very similar to her friend. So that planted the thought in my head, at least. And then almost simultaneously with that, another friend had been seeing this, I'll call him an alt doctor in Toronto, who did this very bizarre galvanic electrodermal skin testing. I won't get into the details. It's in my book. It just seemed very bizarre. He ran these frequencies through your body, and for frequencies supposedly for 240 different parasites, bacteria, and viruses. And I lit up, I lit up on 6 of them, and all 6 were either Lyme strains or some of those co-infections. And it's really funny. He's a real character, an Australian guy, and the Lyme bacteria is a spirochete or spirochete. And he says, it's a spirocket, mate. Totally mispronouncing the name. And the spirochete part of it is derived from the word spiral, so that the Lyme bacteria is actually spiral shaped. And I believe, this may not be true, but my understanding is that's why we get this migratory muscle pain, because the bacteria are literally screwing their way through your muscles. So the diagnosis I talked about in the States is this state-of-the-art lab in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, California, called IGeneX. And it was founded by a guy that probably made $1 bazillion down there, and got Lyme, and like Canada, was frustrated, couldn't get a diagnosis or any respect. So he decided to devote his money and his life into helping others by trying to get a definitive laboratory blood tests, because the blood tests are very dodgy and uncertain. They have to detect antibodies. And so that came back positive. In fact, my Lyme doctor said I had one of the highest readings they'd ever seen. And she said, this is really good because it shows you're full of antibodies. So your body is really fighting hard. And Maureen McShane, she's actually lives in Montreal. She's retired now. But she was set up in Plattsburgh, New York, because she knew if she practiced in Montreal, she might have lost her medical license for prescribing heavy doses of antibiotics. Just as another anecdote, I went to see her, I don't know, half a dozen times, and several times I crossed the border into the New York State at different crossings. And at 3 different crossings, they'd say, where are you going? Plattsburgh. Why are you going? Medical appointment. And the border guard would say, oh, you must have Lyme. Now, what an indictment of our system that random border guards, the US, are seeing so many Canadians going south that they know that there's a Lyme expert in Plattsburgh. When I was going in 2014, Dr. McShane had about 1,500 patients, and about 95% were Canadian. So, she cycled me on and off a number of different antibiotics, and put me on an extremely strict diet of no sugar, no starch, no yeast. And that's basically so that the antibiotics don't really mess you up. And after several years of that, she said, how much better would you estimate you are? And I said, I think I'm about 60% better, but I still could not perform the role I was being paid to perform. So I had to retire prematurely, and I relocated to Ancaster. And all along, I was also desperate, trying all kinds of other things simultaneously with this. I was seeing a naturopath, and she had me on all these different herbal supplements. I was probably spending $300 a month on herbals. This infusion therapy, like an IV drip of different substances. Someone recommended pot cookies. I didn't know enough to go slowly and test the efficacy of it. I just had dinner. I ate this entire pot cookie, and within like 20 minutes after eating it, I went into the bathroom and my eyes were the size of saucers, and I was starved. And then I realized I got the munchies. So all it did was get me stoned, but it didn't take away my pain. I also tried CBD oil. I vaped once marijuana was legal, or at least medical marijuana was legal. I tried vaping it, and none of these things really helped. After I was retired, though, this was really cool. I got wind of, thanks to a neighbor here in Ancaster, of this live blood microscopy lab in Oakville, where she'll take a pinprick of blood from your finger, make a slide, and then project her microscope up on a big computer screen. And you can see your blood bobbing around, and then she's looking for various things. On her intake form, I was, let's just say, economic with the truth. I didn't say why I was there. I didn't want to lead the witness. I just said I was just curious to see, what you might find. So it was really neat because she's moving the slide around, and all of a sudden, oh. I said, oh, what? And she's, oh, nothing, sorry. And then just like 2 minutes later, oh. And she turns and she looks at me, she says, you weren't exposed to a tick, were you? And I said, truthfully, and not that I'm aware of. So she kept going, and then a third round of, oh. And she said, are you sure? And then I fessed up, and I said, yeah, I've got Lyme disease. So it turned out we were both playing a game because, like I said, I didn't want to lead her on. I wanted her to find it herself. And she was very nervous that maybe she'd be the one, didn't want to be the one breaking the news to me that I had Lyme. And so it was the first time, what she was seeing was Babesia, and she pointed it out to me and then showed me textbook photos of it. I mean, you could see the Babesia parasite swimming around in my blood. So, I thought, okay, I was happy, because here I have a real definitive in your face. I didn't retire for nothing, put it that way. And then, post-retirement, I heard about this Rife machine, and I'm not going to go into much detail here now. I put it in the book. It's very bizarre. It's actually not that dissimilar from that Australian character I talked about. A fellow named, last name is Rife. He invented this machine back in the late 20s, 30s, ostensibly to cure cancer. And the concept was he believed every life form oscillates or vibrates at a unique frequency. And if you can figure out what that is and then inundate your body with that frequency, that life form basically resonates and explodes. And I draw the analogy, maybe it's sort of like an opera singer that can hit the right note and shatter a wine glass. So this machine supposedly there's so much mythology around it. Yeah, supposedly he was curing cancer, but it was at the very same time that big pharma was just taking off. Penicillin had just been discovered, and there's all kinds of conspiracy theories that he was basically shut down, driven into alcoholism, and died in poverty, and they destroyed his blueprints. It's been revived for Lyme and a number of other things. It's never been certified by either the American or Canadian medical associations. It's very expensive. If someone's considering it, do your homework. All I can say is it helped. And that's as far as I go. It's really weird, but it helped. It took several rounds on it, but all of a sudden I found I was much better. So now here's a picture I do want to refer to, because those of you who aren't familiar with the northern saw-whet owl, this owl is about the size of a pop can. It's the cutest little murder bird. And there he is holding a vole, looking very proud, sleeping with his catch of the day. So, I retired, I moved here to Ancaster. I immediately set up bird feeders. In all my previous houses, I'd always had bird feeders. And being Bob and being a science guy, I saw Carolina wren in the backyard. I'd never seen one of those before. So I started researching the birds of the area. I really got into that while I'm watching the bird feeders. And all of a sudden one day the light bulb went off, and geez, I'm sitting longer than I used to be able to. Like normally I'm shifting around and grimacing in pain. And all of a sudden I realized my mind was kind of off my body when I was really immersed in studying and watching the birds. So, then I learned that there's this fabulous Hamilton Naturalist Club here, full of, very knowledgeable members of, all aspects of nature. And I signed up for a half-day little bird outing, which I thought I can handle this. It was only a half-hour drive from home. I met so many great people. They gave me they started mentoring me and gave me all kinds of tips and help on everything from the birds to binoculars to cameras. So, a lot of people will talk about their spark bird, which is the bird that they saw, they were blown away by it, they got hooked, and that's what sparked them in the birding. I would say for me, it was the Hamilton Naturalist Club and that outing that sparked me. And once you're hooked for life. It's very addictive. So I started birding. I do a little walk. I bought a Fitbit, and all of a sudden I discovered I've gone from 200 meters with a cane that I was walking several kilometers. And I mean, it's not that the pain was going away. It's not a cure. It's a coping mechanism. I was just enjoying life and out of my body. So, comparing my new world, as an amateur ornithologist compared to a professional geologist, in some ways, birding is actually very much like mineral exploration. They're both treasure hunts. I spent a lot of my career looking for gold all over the world. And, here's a golden crown kinglet and goldenrod. So, there is a big similarity between looking for minerals and looking for birds. You just never know what treasure or gem you're going to find. In other ways, they're very different. Like every specialty, birding has its own acronyms and lingo. And for example, in geology, banded iron formation, and this is a beautiful example from my rock and mineral collection. Banded iron formations are the great source of iron ore for the world. Well, we would call those BIFs, banded iron formation. Well, I got birding, and I heard people talking about BIFs, but it stands for birds in flight. So you hear people talking about, I'm not a very good photographer with BIFs, and that's what I'm included in that. So then I had to start learning some new lingo. One of them is lifer. And some of you will know this term well, the people that know me and that are already birders. But so a lifer is a bird that you're seeing for the first time, a species you've never seen before. Your first day, first time seeing it. It's a real thrill. And I got to tell you, after birding a few years, it's diminishing returns. It gets harder and harder to get lifers unless you travel further and further afield, or unless some stray bird comes into your area. Another expression is, oh, I dipped on it. And so to dip on it means you failed to see it. And often it means, other people have reported and seen the bird, and you've gone looking, and either it's unbeknownst to you, it's moved on, so you're wasting your time, or you're maybe just not a good birder and you can't find it or can't spot it. And then a lot of people say nice capture, which refers to pictures. If you get a really good photo, nice capture. And then the most annoying expression in birding is you walk up to a crowd of people that are looking at a rare bird, and all you hear is, it was here 10 minutes ago. In fact, I used to joke long before I thought of writing this book. I always joked that if I ever wrote a bird book, it would be called, You Should Have Been Here 10 minutes ago. So, like I say, birding can be really highly addictive, and depending on who you are and which angle of birding you're coming from, because it appeals to a lot of people from different avenues, different ways. It can be a science, it's an art, it's a recreation or hobby. For some, it's almost a game or a sport, even competitive. And it's, it can be a spiritual experience. So, on a very high level, I've done some research. What are the drivers that hook people on birding? And they can all be broadly lumped into two main categories: appreciative motivation and achievement motivation. So I'll go through each of those. So appreciative motivation, and I put red ticks next to them all because this is really what drives me. It is the well-based motivations. It's like the enjoyment of getting exercise, getting fresh air, being out in nature, hearing the rustle of the trees and the birds singing. It's sharing those experiences with friends, and it's it's the mindfulness, getting your mind off your body, and the mental calming. The achievement motivation is more of the goal achievements, goal-driven things, like listers. Birders tend to be very big listers. You keep everything from a backyard list to a seasonal list to a city list, a county list, a town list, a province list, a state list, a country list, a life list, a seasonal list, if I didn't already say that. I do keep a few lists, but I'm not fanatic about it. Some are totally driven by photography only. I didn't set out at all to be a bird photographer, and to be honest, when I first started, I carried a camera and took pictures because I didn't know what the hell I was looking at. So I get a picture and then take it home and research it and go through all my bird guides and find out what I took. And the more I did that, the more I kind of got into it and started getting proud of the bird pictures I was taking. And I've kind of gone down that path more than I set out to. eBird is the biggest citizen science project in the world, run by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And it's basically a big open website where people put in their bird lists of what they see every day. And then Cornell crunches this data, and it's fantastic. And people can get very competitive who has the biggest eBird lists for various areas. One of the goals is skill building, and that I love, that I've basically traded a geology degree for an amateur ornithology degree. I'm quite proud of that. Some people are really driven by giving back, by contributing as citizen scientists, by contributing to eBird, by atlasing. Every 20 years, Ontario does a 5-year breeding bird atlas survey to figure out the density of birds breeding here, which means they're living here. Very, very important work, and it takes a lot of volunteers. So that's a very big contribution. And a lot of my friends are very involved with it. We're in year 3 of the current atlasing. Posting photos on social media, I've really gotten into that. I've really enjoyed doing that. I've built a nice following on Twitter, but that's going down the tubes these days thanks to the new owner. And some really like maintaining a blog that they post to daily. So these are this is the achievement side of birding. So you can see there's different strokes for different folks, but it's all birding. It's just some people enjoy different aspects of it. I know it's really corny, but to me, the word birds could be an acronym for birding inevitably reduces disease symptoms. When I'm birding, I'm out of my body and I'm enjoying life. I'm getting lots of exercise out in the great outdoors, soaking up nature in the fresh air. And in fact, I took this picture of a bluebird on my little point and shoot camera on that Hamilton Naturalist Club field trip in the spring of 2016. And you might say, this is what really hooked me. I was, wow, I took that, and what a beautiful bird. So you can get hooked. Other reasons I'm passionate about it is it challenges my sense of observation. It's like, I hate to say, like being like a hunter, the thrill of stalking, but you're not killing anything, but you have to be very observant. And sometimes those little warblers are 100 feet up in a tree and they're hiding in the shadows, and you really have to be patient, which it's good for me. It slows me down. Sometimes you just sit and wait for that perfect look at the bird or nice picture, and you just have to relax and hope the birds come to you. And learning to identify species both by sight and by song. By song is a challenge for me with my hearing impairment. And I talked about the photography, which I'm quite enjoying. Another big aspect of birding is friends. Throughout my previous life, and I'm going to call that BB, and that's not for Bob Bell, but let's call that for before birding. My friends, and probably like most people, your friends are kids that you went to school with or work colleagues. And with all due respect to them, I'm not dumping my old friends. I now have this new set of friends who come from all walks of life. And it's been incredibly opening my eyes, because so many people have such interesting lives with different work and career and jobs. For the last 20 years, I spent most of my time either with geoscientists or mostly with lawyers. So I was in this bubble, and now I'm meeting all kinds of very interesting folks. So it's a really neat thing that people can share a passion from such diverse backgrounds. And I never thought in my late 50s, early 60s, I could make so many new friends. So, if you're living locally here and we haven't met and you do see me out on the trails, please stop and say hi and introduce yourself. You see a lot of bird photos that are just strictly posed. And, yes, sure, I'm happy to get those. But what I really like is just watching birds living their busy lives and trying to get candid shots like this, blue-eyed vireo exit stage left, just taking off. It's really neat just to watch them going about their lives. I love the way the cyclicity of birds demarks the passage of time and the seasons. In the spring, like in 1 month from now, every morning, it's like a little kid waiting for Santa, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy all at once. They all came overnight, because most birds, the songbirds, they migrate at night. And so every morning during that peak migration of, let's say, May 1st to May 15th, it's even tighter than that. There's a new wave every morning. You never know what you're going to see. And you go through spring migration. And then, in the summer, it's actually the quietest time. The birds aren't coming to the feeders so much. They're nesting, they're sitting on eggs, they're raising their young. But then they start bringing the young fledge, and then you start seeing them at the feeders again. And then by late July, believe it or not, the shorebird migration has started. They're coming down from the Arctic on their way south. And in the fall, you've got the fall migration back. And then you go into duck season and through the winter owl season. And then we're right back here now. We're sort of in the doldrums right now, waiting for migration is starting. We're already getting lots of neat birds back, like eastern meadowlarks. And I saw an eastern phoebe this morning. So, they're starting to roll in, but they'll really roll in about 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And speaking of eastern phoebes, here's one for you, Gene. The main health benefit of birding for me is that it's a form of mindfulness and mental calming. It's just, you're in the zone and your mind is off your worries and your anxieties and your pains. And it basically helps me cope with my limitations. And there's another corny dad joke, sorry. So, Birds are just amazing, awesome, beautiful, living dinosaurs. Dinosaurs didn't go extinct. Birds are evolved dinosaurs. So here's a couple of memes. A good friend of mine, Kelly Sue O'Connor, made the one on the left, and the one on the right. I stole it off the internet, so I don't know who made it. And I can't give credit for it, but that's me. Be careful what you ask, because I could go on and on and on about birds. And speaking of that, I will, just for a couple of minutes. You can't. I have a captive audience. I have to speak about a few attributes of birds that just amaze me. And I deliberately chose the peregrine falcon to display here. It's the fastest animal on the earth. Here in Hamilton, we have a number of pair that breed. And I'd like to just step aside for the talk for a minute and say that I was on this committee that worked. It was called the Burlington Hamilton Bird Friendly City Committee. That we did a lot of work to get each city certified by Nature Canada as being bird friendly. And that's how I met and developed this wonderful relationship with BurlingtonGreen, because BurlingtonGreen were great supporters of that initiative. And we can't thank you guys enough for that. Kelly, it was fantastic working with you. And anyway, long story short, we did a city poll, and the peregrine falcon won the poll for the city bird, and is the unofficial, because the city hasn't actually passed a resolution or made it legal, but it's the unofficial city bird of Hamilton. Okay, so just a couple of amazing facts about birds, and I always like to talk about migration because it's just awesome. And now that the scientists have these very light geo trackers, it's not like the old days where they put a band on a bird, and if you're lucky enough to find it again, capture it again, and you can see where it's gone. They can now, it's like a GPS on the bird, so you can track a bird in real time. And there's this one species called bar-tailed godwit, and they live in New Zealand and Alaska, and they basically commute back and forth between the seasons. And one just recently set the all-time record. This bird flew 13,559 kilometers nonstop. It flew 11 days and nights. Now, how awesome is that? Not eating, not sleeping. The birds can shut down half their brain at a time, so they'll shut half of it down and then keep flying. And then I talked about this before, those of you that attended my warbler talk. Blackpoll warblers have the longest migration of any of the warblers. And it's probably one of the most extraordinary feats on the planet, because they weigh about 12 grams. And they do fatten up before they migrate. So here's a map. The Blackpoll warblers, they breed in the salmon color from Alaska all the way over to Newfoundland. But you can see they overwinter down in South America, and typically in Brazil. So when they're ready to migrate south, they don't beeline, like the ones in Alaska don't go straight down to Brazil. They all cross North America. They go to Nova Scotia down to about Cape May, New Jersey. They fatten up for a few days. They get that 12 grams up to maybe 20 grams. They take a leap of faith sunlight when they got a nice northerly wind, and they set out over the North Atlantic. It's September, there's hurricane season. They have no idea what they're flying into. And they fly 72 hours nonstop. Some might land in the Caribbean, but most go all the way to South America. 2,500 miles nonstop in about 72 hours. And they lose about half of that body weight. Now, coming back is the green arrows. They tend to take a more direct route, and they island hop. It's much more leisurely. It's the southward migration that's just spectacular. So, we use bird lingo every day, and I'm not going to sit here and read all these. You can see them, but we have so many bird expressions. I put a whole appendix in my book, and I'm sure I missed lots, but everything from the early bird catches the worm, to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. We have so many expressions, and we don't even stop and think about it, that birds are a big part of our everyday language. But bird watching was always considered sort of nerdy. It was a hobby of old men in tilly hats. It's not anymore. There's so many young people into birding. It's amazing. It's heartwarming. And it's not even, it used to be called bird watching, and now it's birding, which is much more aggressive. It sounds more like a sport. And I think a lot of the fact how it's become cool is technology. We have birding apps. eBird allows young guys, I don't use eBird that way, but they're actually eBirding on their phones in real time. Oh, there's 8 robins, click, click, click. And they're competing and they're keeping notes and they're back and forth, and everybody knows what everybody else is finding in real time. It's made it a real sport. And even like digital cameras. I can remember one summer I had the pleasure of working in Greenland, and I took, I think, about a dozen rolls of 36 pictures. Well, I shot all of those pictures like in the first 4 or 5 days, and then I was up there for like 6 weeks or 8 weeks with no more film, no more photography. Now with digital cameras, you just delete, and cut them off and keep going. So it's really made it a lot better. There has been a huge explosion of interest in birding over the past few years during the pandemic. It was the fastest growing hobby in the world during the pandemic. And it makes sense because it didn't matter what your pastime was. It wasn't happening. Everything was locked down. You couldn't watch sports and TV. You basically couldn't do anything. But the birds were still out there. They were still living their lives. They're singing away. And I swear they were even louder because there was no traffic. So people would go for a walk around their neighborhood and they were paying attention and they got hooked. There was articles in the New York Times and the Washington Post and all over the world about, eBird had this like 50% increase in reported sightings as people took up birding. And, my book isn't the first to talk about the benefits of birding to one's health. There's all kinds of actually scientific papers, anecdotal stories, and studies about birding in nature as being very good for mental health. But my book might be the first that really addresses physical health. So, birding doesn't have to be intimidating and expensive and require great big long walks. What I've listed here is this is all birding. If you're sitting watching bird feeders, that's birding. If you walk down to the park and sit on a bench and you watch the pigeons or whatever birds, that's birding. If you're not able physically to get out, but you can sit at home and watch internet, there's all kinds of nest cams and feeder cams and webcams. And, you can sit at home and for example, there's a woman named Tammy Hash runs a feeder cam on behalf of Cornell up in Manitowoc in northwestern Ontario all winter. And you could sit at home and you can watch gorgeous evening grosbeaks and pine grosbeaks and common redpolls coming and going all day to their feeders. It's just so relaxing and beautiful. So you need to bird to your birdability, and birdability is really becoming a big thing in the States, trying to make it more inclusive and for all. And I'm a big proponent of that. My birdability, I love birding with friends. I know I will have fun. It's always great camaraderie. Getting a lifer with a friend, you're literally high-fiving each other. It's a great bonding experience. But with all due respect, all my friends, I actually do prefer to bird alone or in a very, very small group. And it's because of that anxiety of crowds and noise. And if I'm carpooling with them all, I'm always cognizant that, they can go birding all day. And I'm cognizant that I never know when it's going to come over me, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I'm done and I need to go home and rest. So I really do prefer, and that just kind of stresses me, puts me on edge thinking I'm going to ruin it for somebody else. And, eBird, I see my friends out eBirding, and you have to basically count the birds. It's not just good enough to say, I saw a Canada goose. Well, how many were in the field? Well, I have no interest of counting 500 Canada geese. I mean, there's way of doing it in bulk just by estimating. You can learn to estimate very accurately. But that would just turn birding into work for me, and I don't do it. I use eBird as a way to know what people are finding and where to go, but I don't contribute to it. Now, I did talk about listing, that I'm not a big lister, but one thing that I really got into as listing was, In 2019, a very good friend of mine, Carter Dorsch, lives up in Echo Bay near the Sioux. He launched what's called a 5MR challenge, and the MR stands for 5 mile radius challenge. And this was for all of Ontario for 2020. And the concept is to see how many bird species you can find within a 5 mile radius of your house. And the idea was, reduce your carbon footprint instead of driving all over the place and chasing birds and just bird your local patch. Well, he could not have picked, I mean, he didn't know, but he couldn't have picked a better year to do it than 2020 because everything got shut down. Anybody that was hoping to go to Point Pelee or Long Point or Rondo Provincial Park, they were closed. So the only place you could bird was close to home. So I really got into that. And bottom line is, I discovered a number of really great bird habitats, drainage, stormwater ponds, for example, and drainage lagoons that I didn't know existed. And they're full of ducks and shorebirds in the spring. So it really gave me great comfort that if my Lyme gets worse or just general health as I age, I don't need to drive all over the place. I can get my fix quite close to home. So it was a really awesome exercise for me personally. And I'm up to, now I just keep it sort of as a cumulative list rather than yearly. I just want to see cumulative, how many species have I seen? I'm up to 202 species that I've seen. And given that I think there's about 462 species in Canada, that's pretty darn good to be within 5 miles of Ancaster. And I think it's about 17 that I've dipped on where, I've been away and then someone's reported a really cool bird that was here. And by the time I get back, it's gone, or I've gone looking and I dipped on it. So that would bring it to 219 that I'm aware of. Another type of birding is called twitching, and this is the chasing of rare birds or vagrants, birds that are out of range. And it's a funny term. It comes from a story of two British bird watchers back in the 50s, and they went around using a motorcycle. And apparently the passenger in the back was shivering away and twitching in the cold, so it became twitching. And I don't typically twitch because birds do have wings. And by the time I get there, I never really hear, you should have been here 10 minutes ago. So I don't do a lot of chasing of rare birds, but I did do one this winter, a very famous woodpecker. It's called the Lewis's woodpecker. Here's its range out in Western North America. And it has been at bird feeders at a lovely couple's house on Manitoulin Island since I think early January. And it seems to have just moved right in. The couple have been wonderful and accommodating and welcome to the birding community. Literally hundreds of birders have made the pilgrimage up to Manitoulin to see this bird. So I did go up and see this Lewis's woodpecker. I mentioned just watching bird feeders is a form of birding. And it used to be you just hang out a bird feeder, but now what I really recommend, and you can get this gear at Wild Birds Unlimited or Urban Nature, those sort of stores. You get a central pole like this, central upright with a bunch of shepherd's hooks. And that way you can hang different styles of feeders off of it, because not every bird wants to eat from a platform. Some want to cling, some want to knock the seed to the ground and eat below it. And they have different food preferences and eating style. You want, very, very important, you want this baffle, and that keeps the squirrels and the raccoons from climbing up, cleaning out the feeders and your wallets. Hard to see here, I'll show it in the next slide. I have this long appendage here, and it's just like a landing arm that smaller birds might sit on while they're waiting their turn to get on to the feeders. So here's that landing arm with a chipping sparrow on it. Here's my best yard bird ever. It was a scarlet tanager. I was actually out birding. Thankfully, I wasn't very far away, and my cell phone rang about 8:30 in the morning, and Irene says, "Bob, you've got to get home. There's a scarlet tanager sitting on our barbecue." And, we won the jackpot. He was clearly migrating overnight and ran out of fuel right above my house and dropped down, saw my feeders, and he sat gorging at our feeders all day and didn't care how close I got. I got a ton of pictures, and just lovely. Some birds like finch, like these evening grosbeaks, like platform feeders. I took this in November. I was very lucky because these are boreal birds that this winter have come further south, called interruption. And for 2 days, we had 22 of these guys in our backyard. The males are the yellow ones, and these are the females. I like this dinner bell feeder. It serves a couple of purposes. It keeps the seeds dry, so they don't get wet and moldy, but also you can regulate that height. So you can scrunch it down so the smaller songbirds, you can scrunch it as tight as you want so the little tiny birds could still get in, but the larger birds that maybe you don't want to feed, like mourning doves, blackbirds, can't get through. I find this is a seed cylinder, and there's various forms of seed cylinder feeders, but I find virtually every species of bird loves seed cylinders. This is a red-breasted nuthatch enjoying the feed. You can get these ones that are called clingers only. And it's good because only the small birds can coordinate hanging on there and eating. I've watched blue jays burn more calories flapping away trying to get on it, and they just give up. So it's good because the little birds that aren't getting bullied off. And then there's various specialty type feeders. For example, American goldfinch like Niger seeds. So you can buy specialty Niger tubes. I think this picture was taken in March one year. You can see they're molting back into their bright yellow plumage, and the black's coming in on their heads. I've got this little peanut tray, but I've got this a little roof over top that I can regulate the height of. So this little Carolina wren is just snug as a bug in there, and he's not going to be hassled by the bigger birds. Another specialty feeder, of course, is suet feeders for the woodpeckers. The Carolina wrens like the suet, and some other birds, some of the nuthatches do. I like this one with the long paddle because then larger woodpeckers can get on there and brace their long tail and it's easier for them to cling on it. I keep waiting for a pileated woodpecker. I've had them fly through the yard, but they've never landed on the feeders. Really great specialty feeders for Baltimore Orioles. They love grape jelly. They love oranges. One spring, we were blessed for a couple of days. We had 19 Baltimore and Orchard Orioles in our backyard. It was just nirvana. They arrive May 3rd is the median arrival date. So less than a month to go, and these guys will be in the backyard again. Can't wait. Hummingbirds. Please don't buy the colored nectar you see in stores. It's not good for them. It's just food dye. You can easily make your own sugar water. It's just 4 parts water, 1 part sugar. And the color of the feeder's enough to attract them. You don't need the colored nectar. So the female doesn't have the red gorget like the male. And a bird bath is always a good thing. Everybody loves a bath and a drink, and I put a heater in it in the winter to keep it open. They still need water even in the winter. Some recommended resources. I've talked a lot about Cornell Lab. So Cornell came out with this app that you put on your phone called Merlin. And originally all it had was this photo ID. So you load you get a picture of a mystery bird, you load it into your phone. You tell Merlin where you took it. It reads the date off the picture. It puts all this in the database. So now it knows where you are, what the time of year is. So it automatically shrinks down the list, and it goes through, and it's supposedly somewhere between 90 and 95% accurate. Within a few seconds, it spits out the answer of what you're looking at. And if it's not sure, it might give you a second and a third option of very similar birds. But just recently, I think maybe in the last year and a half, they've added this sound ID. And this is like the Shazam for birds. It's a game changer for me with my hearing, because I go out, I just hit record, a sonogram appears, you can see the lines going, and then the names of the birds all start appearing. So, if it says winter wren, then I know, okay, I should be looking down in the reeds down low. if you know what the habitat the bird's going to be in. So it hears a lot of birds that I'm just not capable of hearing, and it allows me to look in the right place for them or be aware of them. And then iBird Pro is another app I bought for my phone. It's basically like having a big book, a big field guide book for, I think it was like $23 on your phone. So very convenient to have that luxury. A few books recommended for reading. David Allen Sibley's book, What It's Like to Be a Bird. This is good for all ages. I gave it to a great nephew when he was about 10. He loved it. I read it twice. I loved it. Here's Chris Early. He's one of the ones that wrote a blurb at the front of my book from the Guelph Arboretum, and he's written a number of books. This is one of his most recent, Feed the Birds. And Jennifer Ackerman has written a number of great books, really interesting. Another really interesting resource, if you're interested in delving in more to the therapeutic side of birding, is my friend Kelly Sue O'Connor has been making video documents of people that have found birding therapeutic to their health. She's focusing mostly on mental health, but I'm proud to say I think I was her second interviewee. And so there is a video of me being interviewed and birding with Kelly. And you can find her, it's all under Birder Brain on Facebook and Instagram. And she's got a website, birderbrain.com. So, I do have an ulterior motive in preaching the virtues of birds. The more people that I can get hooked and interested in birds, the more people are going to start caring about birds and then caring about their habitat and their land and conservation of that habitat and land, preserving green spaces, voting the right way when green belts are being developed, and concerned about climate change. The birds are the canary in the coal mine on climate change. And that's a great segue now back to Lyme, because climate change is clearly a big driver in this rapid expansion of black-legged ticks northward and the accompanying Lyme disease. So this is from the Ontario government showing that 2016 on the left and 2022. And you can see the expansion of where they have detected Lyme-bearing ticks. Now, I would argue, I suspect there was actually more here in 2016 than shown, because I don't think they were surveying and taking it as seriously as they should have been at that time. And I think they are now. But still, you can see how they are increasing in density and moving further north. And I hate to say it, but one of the big vectors is my beloved birds. The ticks piggyback onto the birds and get a ride north and then fall off and reproduce and then stay here. So, it's a vicious cycle. But I don't want to fear, again, I don't want to fear monger. I don't want anyone's fear of Lyme to ruin your enjoyment of the outdoors. You just got to use some common sense. And, not every bug bite is a tick bite, and not every tick is the black-legged tick or deer tick. And not every deer tick is infected with Lyme. I put bug in quotes because ticks aren't insects, they're arthropods. There's a slight difference. But sensible precautions, stay out of tall grass. That's where they typically are. Tuck your pants into your socks. If I'm in a dodgy area or have to go off trail, I really like wearing tall rubber boots. They have ticks seem to slide off them. You can't buy clothing that's been impregnated with this permethrin. It supposedly repels the ticks. And the key thing is, after an outing, do a thorough body check when you're home and have a good shower. Just like this romantic couple, when we get back to the cabin, I'll open the champagne, start the fire, and we'll check each other for ticks. How's that for a date? So, but Lyme is curable if it's treated immediately. And the clock is ticking, and the pun is intended. I've had several friends call me and say, Bob, what do I do? What do I do? No, I said I wasn't going to give medical advice, but on this one, I'm pretty adamant. They'll say, I've had an embedded tick. I went to the doctor and he said, well, we'll send the tick away to be tested. And if the tick comes back positive, then I'll give you some antibiotics. And I say, no, you go back to the doctor and insist on the antibiotics now, today, because it could take months to get the test back on the tick. And I was 13 months and I now have chronic Lyme. I got to look this up. I just read today that it's actually officially called post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. It's easier to say chronic Lyme. So, if you have an embedded tick, get on antibiotics immediately. And, apparently just 1 or 2 days of antibiotics and, you're going to be good. So, I mean, that's just a really quick Reader's Digest version of my book. It obviously expands on a lot more of these stories. I think my book would be a great resource if you're struggling to convince a friend to get into birding. I would hope that I do a good job of getting people hooked on it. I give an awful lot of resources in the book. I give specific websites and Facebook groups, webcams, birding apps, books, etc. And expanded list over what Kale was talking about at the beginning. The publisher is Hancock House. You can buy it directly from them. You can buy it online at Amazon. I'm disappointed in Indigo that they're not carrying it in store. It's only online. But locally, Burlington Wild Birds, a different drummer, and it's now at the RBG shop at their headquarters. King West, where I'm pictured here. Urban Nature, there's, I think, 9 stores that run from St. Catharines right through the GTA over to Kingston. They're about to carry it in every store. It's up in Science North in Sudbury in a store called Backyard Birder. It's in a really neat store in Bruce Mines called S&S Creations. And I'm quite proud to say that it's in Algonquin Park and at Point Pelee. 2 of the best birding spots in the world are carrying my book, and that's pretty humbling. So I just came across this quote just a few days ago. In order to see birds, it is necessary to become part of the silence. But that resonated with me because it's not just being silent in the woods, it's making your brain silent. Turn off all that churning noise and stress and anxiety and aches and pains and become silent and just become one with the forest. And I like this meme that there's no Wi-Fi in the forest, but you're going to get a better connection. So, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Email address here, and I can ask Cale to include that in whatever he sends out at the end. Like I said, I am on Twitter until it completely implodes, so that's as the Birder Bob. And I have set up a dedicated Facebook page, also the Birder Bob, and you're welcome to join that. I try to post daily bird pics. So in closing, for me, birding leads to serenity, which leads to coping with my chronic pain and illness. And if you bear with me, I'd love to read the very last paragraph in my book. Life is a journey, and it's incumbent on us to make the best of it. I hope my journey might inspire some folks suffering with a chronic illness to get out of the limelight and into the sunlight, where the singing birds will warm your heart and lift your spirits. So I wish you all good birding and good health, and thank you so much for attending. That's it. Hey, Kel.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Bob, for sharing all of that incredible information. And I let everybody know, yes, we will send out the survey afterwards, so don't worry about that if it's not working. But I just want to say thank you so much for being willing to share all of this information. And I know there are a few questions. And if you have some time, I would love to see if we can fit in a few of them. Awesome. Okay, so the first one is from the lovely Allie, who is joining us this evening. Is there a bird that you're looking for this year? A 2023 lifer?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Is there
I
a
was
bird?
reading a chat.
It's is there a bird that is on the top of your list as something that you would like to see this year?
It's a good question. Nothing really pops out. One I haven't seen this year that I'd love to see every year is a pine grosbeak. The males are pink, and they're just beautiful birds, and I failed to see one this year. I mean, I do have a list of lifers, but most people won't have even heard of any of them, so I won't go into that.
Fair. I can also say there was just a suggestion. It doesn't sound like a question, but to look into having the Dundas HO of Bruce Trail Conservatory carry your book because it's perfect for tick awareness for those tramping around the Bruce Trail. And then we have a question from
Thank you. Whoever put that up, thank you.
yes, that was Andrea. Thank you, Andrea. And just a comment here from Dave. So great talk, Bob. Just curious if you still find yourself checking out geological features while out birding, or has birding completely taken over? Geology is a good hobby too, or does it remind you of work?
If there's a bird sitting on the rock. No, once a geologist, always a geologist. I still admire and take note of the outcrops, and yeah, I'm always looking at the rocks, but birding is definitely surpassed rocks at this point.
Amazing. I was getting a little excited with the geology talk too, because I also love rocks. And I was like, ooh, there's probably a future webinar if he's not sick of talking about rocks. But I also just wanted to say, I don't think I've ever been more excited about birds in my life. And like other than this moment. And you do such a good job transferring that enthusiasm and joy. And when you were talking about, see, I don't even remember the names, but I remember the feelings where you had the group of like 17 of those yellow birds like in your backyard for a few days. And like I was like, that's so exciting. And they were right there in his backyard. Like I was much more excited than I ever would have imagined being about birds. So yeah, you do a very excellent job, and thank you so much for being able to
Oh,
transfer
thank
that
you.
enthusiasm.
You know, back to Dave's question about the rocks.
Yeah.
I mentioned in my book that I can go and look at, say, a bird picture that I took 3 years ago, and for a lot of them, it takes me right back. I remember where I was. I might even remember the weather, or if it was a long slog in, or a hard walk, or was it raining or whatever. And I look at my rock collection, and for the rocks I collected, I look at a sample and I can remember exactly what swamp I crawled through to get to that outcrop to collect it. So there's kind of an analogy there.
Uh, cool. Super, super cool. There's one more question that came in our Q&A from Sherry. Have you done any birding in other places around the world?
What a great question. Since I became a birder, I have participated in a trip to Mexico. It was organized by a good friend, Barry, who lives in Hamilton. That was fabulous. And I've done some birding in Texas. South Padre Island is fantastic. In fact, South Padre Island is the ideal place for a birder with a non-birding spouse to go. Because the non-birding spouse can go to the beach and walk along the ocean, and the birder can just cross the road to this little oasis where migrating birds are, like Point Pelee. It's fantastic. And there's a few places, another place in Michigan I like to go, Ohio I like to go. But the reason I laugh is because, I often think, I traveled all over the world constantly for over 20 years. And I think of the remote places I went that would cost a fortune, that you wouldn't pay for it yourself to go in, because I was on a helicopter or whatever, and it was work. When I think of the birds that I could have seen, but I was working, and if it had been a birder, I probably would have been fired. Look at the rocks, Bell, not the birds.
Amazing. There's a few more questions that have come in. I just want to acknowledge that we are about 10 minutes over time, but there's still lots of people here, and there's quite a few questions still here. So Bob has said he's willing to keep on answering. And just to recognize, if anybody has to pop out, this whole video will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel, so you can always catch anything that you might have missed once we upload it. So we have another question in here from Kathy. And Kathy says, I'm fairly new to birding and would love to go to Pelee for the spring migration. Is there a place to view this? And then in brackets, I know it won't be as wonderful as Point Pelee, that is closer to the Hamilton or Burlington area.
For migration, you can go to Long Point, which is about an hour and a half drive from here. So it's less than half the distance to Point Pelee. And they do have a banding station there. The Birds Canada have a banding station there. So you actually get to see birds in hand that they've caught and banded. That's really interesting to see them like right there. And you can see a ton of birds there. Woodland Cemetery, believe it or not, in Burlington is a fantastic spot during migration right here in town. You just walk around the edges of the cemetery where there's the forest right, right above the bluffs down to the lake. And during migration, a friend of mine was there this morning and he was seeing all kinds of migrants already. The southerly winds bring them in overnight, even ideal conditions, a southerly wind and then rain, because the birds fly all night. They like the southerly wind because they're getting the free ride or the boost, and then they hit the rain and they drop out. They don't keep going, they'll drop out. And so, all around the margins of Woodland Cemetery, another equivalent spot like that is LaSalle Marina Park. It's like a little oasis. So if the birds have come across Lake Ontario or even come around the end, and all of a sudden here's this little patch of forest in the middle of all the concrete jungle, LaSalle can be a really great place. And I mean, there's a number of spots like that.
Amazing. I'm just like in my mind, sort of comparing it to, I hope it's not a strange comparison, but like surfing, where you have to be very aware of like the natural sort of rhythms of nature to know when like the perfect times are. So like it adds an extra level to your awareness that you're like aware of what the winds are and like what the current weather is, and you just know when like the sweet spots are.
There's actually a website called Birdcast that basically forecasts how many 100 million birds are going to be on the flight, taking the flight tonight based on the winds.
Wow, what a time to be a birder. Very
Yeah,
exciting.
exactly.
So another question from the lovely Allie, and there's a few more as well. So do you have any tips for very, very novice bird watchers on how to get a good image captured? And she is asking for herself and claiming the title of a novice.
How to capture a good picture?
Yeah.
I'm amazed how good cell phone photos are now. I mean, they can't zoom in very tight like a camera can, full camera. But I would just start with a cell phone, and then if you get past that, Ali, email me. You can buy cameras that are reasonably priced. They're called bridge cameras. So they're sort of between a point and shoot and a full camera with interchangeable lenses. So the bridge camera is one fixed lens, but they have really good scope, a really good zoom, so that you can actually get, and you can set the light settings. So they're much more sophisticated than a point and shoot, but it's not like buying a big expensive full camera. And that's what I use, and I think I get pretty darn good pictures.
Yeah, all of those images that you shared are spectacular. And just the close-ups, I think for me on birds, I've never seen that close. Just reminds me that if you look closely at nature, pretty much everything you look at is spectacular and like a work of art.
Yep.
Amazing. So Christine has a question. So she's saying, I have over 7 bird feeders that she fills daily and doesn't want to be a downer, but hearing that avian flu is back on the news, do you recommend we take down our feeders again for a little while?
I think it's up to you. There seems to be mixed messages coming. The avian flu really affects mostly waterfowl. It has been found in some songbirds, but it's primarily waterfowl. People have probably seen that a dog died in Toronto. It was gnawing on the carcass of a Canada goose, and it died yesterday. It's kind of a hullabaloo in the news today. I think you just have to really watch, and if you see in like a bird that doesn't look right or not acting normally, I would take them down and just leave them down for a couple of weeks. I've got mine out still, but I'm watching them constantly, and I haven't seen any signs of sickness. But the minute I do, I would take them down. And in that case, if you've had an infected bird at the feeder, the chances of a human catching it, I think, are pretty remote. But I would use rubber gloves and thoroughly scrub those feeders, with bleach or something. I think most humans that have been infected with avian disease were poultry workers, really working right in a chicken barn sort of thing.
Mhm. Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Bob. Another question or comment here, and it looks like a combination from Dave. Does it upset you to see people going into the outdoors without taking suitable tick precautions, such as tucking pant legs into socks, particularly in higher risk tick areas, knowing what you know now?
I can't be the tick police for everybody. I'd probably just get told where to go. So
Yes, that is very fair. Some things you just have to let go, I suppose. And a clarification from Christine, who was the person who asked about the bird feeders, was just sharing that she's mostly concerned about spreading it among birds. And she said that it was nice to know that songbirds aren't as affected as much. So that was
it's
just
not that some of them have had it, but I think the big prevalence is waterfowl and poultry.
poultry. Excellent. So that is all of the questions I see right now. And we just have a few slides that I will whip through quite quickly, knowing that almost all of the emails, all of the things that I'm about to share will be available on our follow-up email. And I'm sure, Bob, you'll enjoy. There's just a lot of very lovely comments thanking you, including one that just says that they love your humor and appreciate how relatable your commentary is. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I laughed out loud at least 3 times during the presentation. I thought some of those memes and the jokes were just golden. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to share those last few slides and then wish everyone a farewell. So we've done our Q&A. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your extra time here with us, Bob. And then just another shout out and spotlight for Bob's presence on social media. So here you'll see Bob's Facebook page and then also the Twitter page. And you'll see the @ is the same for both of them, the Birder Bob. So definitely encourage everyone to check out those pages. And I know that at least from checking out his Facebook page that there's so many really good bird photos and you will get addicted. There's one. So these are just some of our upcoming events, and I won't go too much into detail with any of them, knowing that you will get these details in the follow-up email. But we have some Earth Day celebrations taking place on April 22nd. We actually have a tree planting at Millcroft Park. The registration is almost full for that, so I recommend if anybody is interested in participating, they check out our website right away, and it should be easy to find and easy to navigate to that page on our website. And we also have eco activities taking place at our Burlington Beach Eco Hub during the day. I believe the hours are from 11 to 4. All of those details are available on our website. And it will include things like a tree walk, some kids activities, a beach cleanup. There's a repair cafe going on inside. So there's lots of cool stuff as part of that if you're looking for something to do for Earth Day. We have our youth network that runs continuously all the time. It's for ages 14 to 24, and we try and have one in person and one online offering a month. One of the online offerings was actually attending this webinar today, and we had several members of our youth network here present with us. So thank you to all of those people for attending. And then we have our Zero Waste Extravaganza, which is coming up on May 13th, and this is our 4th zero waste drop-off event that we've held in partnership with Burlington Center, who's former Burlington Mall. And this is where we accept all sorts of different kinds of e-waste. So whether that's an old printer, an old laptop, an old cell phone, an old external hard drive, an old battery, just random cords that you don't know what are for. Pretty much anything that has electronic components we will take. And not only do they get responsibly recycled through our partnership with the Electronics Recycling Association, but we also are able to earn a small amount of funds based on the weight of the donations and the waste that is dropped off. So this is an excellent way where you can clear out your house for spring cleaning, bring us all of your waste to make sure it's properly disposed of, and also help to fund some of our important work in the community. And there's also a repair cafe as a part of that day. So if you have like a lamp that's not working or a small piece of electronics, on our website and on the resources that we'll send out. You can check out the Repair Cafe's Facebook page, and they have a little bit more details about all the different items that they accept and the ones that they don't accept. And there's more information about that, but it will be sent out in the follow-up email. And I just wanted to say thank you again to all of you for joining us tonight. And for those of us who are watching this on YouTube right now, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We will be sending out our post-event survey, encouraging anyone who is able to support our organization to please make a donation through our website. And you can find that pretty easily as soon as you land. We're a charitable organization, and we rely very heavily on the funds from the community to continue the work that we're doing. And the planet needs us now more than ever. So if you are able to spare some funds, become a monthly donor, a one-time donor. Really, we just appreciate anything, whether it's your time, your energy, your funds. Even just a retweet on Twitter or a like and share of one of our posts is greatly appreciated. And we have lots of volunteer opportunities that are listed on our website. And we are especially looking for help with our social media right now. So, and also thank you to the Burlington Foundation for their wonderful support of our youth network, which was a part of this event tonight. And yeah, that's pretty much all from Burlington Green. Bob, do you have any final words you'd like to share before we sign off for the evening?
Only that thank you, audience, for your interest in attending, and thank you, Kale and Amy, and all of Burlington Green. You guys have been great. Really appreciate it.
Right back at you. It's a whole life and journey that you've had to get to this point, and we just appreciate your generosity and willing to share your stories of inspiration. And I'm sure that hours and hours and hours that have gone into capturing those photos that we just get to enjoy. So on behalf of all of us from Burlington Green and the audience, we just want to thank you so much. And to everyone watching, I hope you'll join us at our next event, whether it's online or in person. And yeah, together we make a difference. So thanks so much for gathering and coming together. Farewell, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.